Hello, everyone. I'll be sharing with you this time the upcoming Sunday school lesson for September the 4th. It is called The Call of Abraham, and this first set of lessons, 4, will center on Abraham and his family. This lesson comes from Genesis chapter 12 and chapter 15, the first 7 verses of each chapter. Home. Where is home to you? As I share this with you on Monday, August 29th, this morning I went to a funeral service of a man named Rod. Rod is what we call a transplant. He and his wife moved from New Jersey to North Carolina, living in the Edenton area for the past 30 years or so. But as one of the preachers who was conducting the service today said, Rod will always be a Yankee, a Northerner. So where was home for Rod? A couple of months ago, I was talking with the wife of my first cousin, who is my age. We graduated together, meaning he grew up in Perquimans County. But in their married adult life, they have lived in Raleigh and Charlotte, currently having homes in both of those cities. When talking about where home is for them, she said that home is wherever Bob, her husband, is. Wherever Bob is, that is home. Therefore, home isn't a city, it's not a building, but it is her relationship with her husband. Now, I like that. Home. Where was home for Abraham? Abram, as he was called, grew up in a place called U-R. It is interesting that there was much that happened in the Bible that centered in the countries of Iraq and Iran. Now, and even then, mortal enemies to Israel. Abram came from Iran, then worked his way up to Iraq, then to Turkey, and finally God told him to leave Haran, which borders on Syria and Turkey, and finally go to a new place that would eventually be called Israel, but in the Bible was usually called Canaan. The calling from God that led to a new move and a new life happened when Abram was 75 years old. Now for us, 75 years is old, retirement age. Many people don't live to be 75. But in Abram's time, it was middle age or maybe even young middle age because Abram would live another 100 years. Now he would make this move with his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot, to whom Abram was like a guardian. He would make that room with all their possessions and all their slaves. Now Abram would be a nomad for most of the rest of his life. He entered Canaan as a semi-wealthy man, and he would greatly prosper and become a very, very wealthy man, and in the process would make Lot also a wealthy man. In chapter 12, here is what we need to know. First, the new land was chosen by God. Abram was compelled to obey this God who was now a personal God. Abram grew up as a pagan, a worshiper of many gods, and now he was a theist, meaning that he worshiped only the one true God. Secondly, God says 5 times what he will do for Abram and his tribe. I will make you into a great nation, which would eventually be called Israel. I will bless you. I will make your name great. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. And then thirdly, here is what God promised Abram and his tribe. God promised Abram progeny, referring to his children, grandchildren, a family tree. God promised Abram prominence, meaning he would be a very esteemed man, important. And God promised Abram protection. Now that would make a great sermon, 3 points to start with P. God giving you progeny, prominence, and protection. Now, what more could a man hope for in his life? The second half of the lesson comes from chapter 15, but to get a fuller picture of the call of Abram or Abraham and his life, his tribe, we need to read the rest of chapter 12 and chapters 13 and chapters 14. And here are some of the highlights, high points. Abram sets up an altar to worship God. All is well until a famine hits the land where they're living, and Abram and his tribe end up in Egypt. Now, Abram's wife, Sarai, is a beauty. She is drop dead gorgeous, and the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, is awestruck by her beauty. He wants her for himself. Pharaoh believes that Sarai is Abram's sister, and while Pharaoh makes Abram richer, he is cursed with plagues because of him taking Sarai. Now, it doesn't seem like anything of a sexual nature occurred. Now, biologically, Sarai is Abram's half-sister. I know this sounds strange, but it was true. Sarai was Abram's half-sister, but truthfully, she is his legal wife. So Abram and his tribe go back to Canaan, again, much wealthier than when they left, but also perhaps embarrassed. Then as Abram and Lot's herds grow so large, they divide up everything, including the land, and Lot and his family go out on their own. All is well until Lot makes some poor choices about where he lives and who he hangs around with, and Abram goes to rescue him. This was the first time being rescued. Now, the second time, it would be God sending angels to rescue Lot from Sodom, Gomorrah. Then Abram encounters the king of Salem, and the king of Salem would become Jerusalem. His name was Melchizedek, and this Melchizedek was also a priest. And Melchizedek blessed Abram, and in return, Abram gave the king a tithe, a tenth of, quote, everything. And just imagine what that was. And then we come to chapter 15, where God speaks to Abram in a vision about the vastness of Abraham's future. Now, the great issue in chapter 15, verses 1 to 7, is the fact that Abraham and Sarah are childless. At this point, Abram believes his heir will be a slave from Damascus named Eliezer. Eliezer has been, quote, born in his house. And that is about all we know about Eliezer. It is clear that Abram is not Eliezer's biological father, because verse 4 says that the true heir will come from Abram's body or his seed. In chapter 16, because of this failure to produce their own child, Sarah gives her handmaiden, a product of the Egypt trip, to Abraham as his new wife. And of course, Abraham takes this new wife, Hagar. They have sexual relations, and of their union comes a child, a boy named Ishmael. Now, Abraham falsely believes that Ishmael is to be the legitimately promised heir, but he is not. At this point and beyond, there is the question of Ishmael's place in God's plan. But the final result would be that Abraham would be considered the father of many peoples, Jewish and Gentile. Because of time moving on, Abraham and Sarah aging, getting older, almost 190, 100 for Abraham, 90 for Sarah, and because of the confusion presented by Ishmael in their presence, God must restate over and over and over again that Abraham and Sarah will have their own child, their own biological child, and they must trust God. The son would be named Isaac. Their progeny, their biological tribe, would be as numerous as the stars in the sky or as the sand on the seashore. In other words, they would be too numerous to count. Israel. Now, chapters 15, verse 6 is the cornerstone verse for the life of Abraham. I encourage you to read it. Abraham believed God, and God credited it, the promises, to him as righteousness. Now, what does this verse mean? Well, it means that Abraham's life, from his calling to his family's future to his relationship with God, was based upon faith, not works. Abraham's salvation was based upon faith. Whatever righteousness Abraham had was based on his faith journey with the Almighty God. And the promises, we talked about progeny, prominence, and protection. The promises were all because of Abraham's faith in God, and the same is true for us. God bless. Have a great week. Hope to see many of you Wednesday or Sunday.